Yeah.
Do you use the Oxford English Dictionary, by the way?
I don't have a subscription, so no, but I
Okay.
like it when I can.
Yeah.
It's fun to use to me.
I have a library, like through the public library in Australia. We get the subscription. So I just found it now and I started using it because I'll post something soon about, I'm trying to like go implement, I'll go over it with you later. I'm trying to implement like clearly defining words and then giving examples for them on things I'm not clear about. But anyway, we can talk about that and do that later. So
Yeah.
let me see what else is on my list. Oh yeah, so with the virtues, like I haven't read all of it, but I read most of that section, and I found it's not something I can like do anything with. As in, it all kind of I'm sort of trying to figure out, is it basically something I hold in mind and then through each action I take, I sort of do a piecemeal analysis of like, am I living by this virtue? Am I living by independence? Am I living by productivity? Am I living, and so on? Is that sort of the purpose of those?
Um, well, I think it's of the concept itself. Like the purpose of the concept, I think, just helps you isolate different types of actions, which you can see in what relevant ways you might be succeeding or not succeeding. So you don't just think of like every action as an individual thing. You can see, am I consistently failing some characteristic, or like, am I consistently being honest or am I consistently being dishonest? And you can distinguish that from the ways you're maybe not as productive as you want to be. Because
Mm,
you can't just say I'm just all good or all bad. Like in certain ways you're good, in certain ways you might not be as
yeah.
good as you can be. So you don't want to just lump it all together. That helps you think about it. Like if you want to fix something, you want to be able to isolate what you want to fix, or even isolate what's going well.
And do you think well, anyway, on that part, I haven't yet found like, there was nothing that stood out to me and like, oh yeah, okay, wow, I can definitely implement this. I couldn't, at least not yet, I couldn't recognize anything in there that was just had obvious application yet. But maybe when I get into it more deeply and then go through epistemology, it'll become a bit clearer.
Yeah,
Um,
it should, and maybe later down the line, whenever you read Ayn Rand's normative ethics, I mean that could be a way down the line, but I mean that's just a way. Just
I mean, Tara Smith, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I never found the ethics like especially groundbreaking to me. It's like a lot more common sense almost to me, but like
Yeah.
falling from the epistemology is where I really found the value in it. It's not like I had a hard time really like saying, well, what's the importance of being virtuous? I mean, it wasn't really a particular revolutionary question to me, and that's not where I got the. It's interesting to think about. It's relevant, but it doesn't have that level of impact as the epistemology.
The virtues, principles, or methods?
Both, maybe.
Both.
They're a principle. Yeah, they're kind of both. It's the principle of action, I guess you would say. A principle that guides action.
Okay. All right, let's continue from, I'll send it in chat, the role of philosophy lecture, and then we can jump to something else because there's only one more question on that. So if you go
Yeah,
to the bottom, basically,
yeah,
all the way to the bottom.
yeah.
No,
IQ.
I'll share screen with you one sec. Hold on. Let me open up another one as well. Okay. So we can go to this, and I pasted. Remember, I was telling you there was this quote I wanted to get your thoughts on as well. We're talking about this one being like,
Yeah.
how did we describe it? Like positive, but then tragic.
Oh, wait, let me look at that again. Yeah.
I was trying,
Yeah, that seems like a good description to me.
as in a positive view of man, but I don't know if you'd have that. If it would be a positive view of man if it's tragic, but like, you're either going to burn up or you're going to turn into dust. Like those are the two options for you. And then this one was we looked at it in terms of mind body split, and this is like idealism, where idealism isn't practical, but you go with the idealism anyway.
Yeah, I would say almost it's tragic in the sense that a heroic man is one who fights the inevitable.
Yes, but then that would mean that you're not made for this universe in a way. Like the
Yeah,
universe
that's the
is,
tragic part, I think.
yeah, but you're still strong and heroic. Well, I found another one which I liked, and I think it's the same. Yeah, I'll just get your thoughts on it too.
And let me maximize this. And oh, wait, let me maximize this. How do I make this bigger?
Oh, you want me to make the font bigger?
Yeah. Just can't find it in the screen here, but that's better. Yeah, here.
It's the same. It's so similar to Jack London.
Who wrote this one?
I can't remember. It's actually he wrote political pamphlets. I don't think he wrote fiction. I forget. I'll have to find it again. But he wrote political pamphlets, but exactly the same.
Yeah.
Man is strong and heroic, but he's going to be dashed to pieces in this universe.
Yeah. That sounds very much like along the same lines.
I wonder if that's a kind of inevitable attitude to take on without technology.
Hmm. I think that's an interesting question. It seems like technology is those sort of people, once they get to see technology, then they're like all in about technology. But I think on some level, I think the technology is fighting the natural world, like that, as if mankind is against nature, like that they must fight to survive.
Yeah, like now we have Linux gurus with like frog memes on their PCs and stuff, and that's completely different.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Let's skip those sense of life analyses and go to this. So it's just the last bit, and he's talking about IQ, and he's saying, um, okay, so obviously corrected this person. He's saying a truck driver doesn't have a limit at IQ, but it's a professional issue, blah blah blah. But then if you have limited IQ, obviously you're going to have trouble in philosophy of any kind. That certainly goes without saying because philosophy is tremendously abstract. But by the same token, if you have limited IQ, the problems that can come up are limited intellectually. So you're protected by the fact that if you're honest, you only deal in very simple issues. So you'll never get to the stage of feeling a problem on the level of sophistication that I'm talking about. What does he mean by that? Like, what does he mean the problems that come up are limited intellectually and like if you're honest
I mean, I
like that
guess
everyone
he's,
has the same problems. I'm not sure I like unless
yeah,
he's talking about obviously you're not going to be a physicist, but a nuclear physicist or like quantum mechanic theorist, but I'm not, it's not clear to me what how
yeah,
does
it seems
that.
like he means more than just like, oh, advanced theory in physics. Like, it may be more advanced topics in philosophy, I guess. I think he's almost making too strong a claim. I kind of agree with you that IQ won't really matter. Like, or just let's just say intelligence, I don't think that necessarily matters when it comes to philosophy. I mean, we can talk about it might take longer to figure out things if you're not as quick or something, but I don't think it's really going to limit you what you can think about. I don't really agree with him that. I mean, yeah, as far as advanced physics, where you need like calculus and whatnot, I would agree with him, but I don't think anything in philosophy is at a level where anything is so complicated that is on the level of advanced physics or something like that. I don't think it really gets that complicated unless you do special sciences like physics or whatnot.
I was curious about it more so from the implications, because what I interpret him saying as is that there are there are different parts of philosophy that you can study, and some aren't necessary unless you're going to in advanced science, for example, or unless you're going to be a researcher. That's sort of how I interpret it. So he's saying like there's the basic understanding that you can have, and then beyond that there's like optional basic understanding that lets you function very well as a human, and for that you don't need, I guess what he's saying is high IQ. And then but then if you want to, there are certain parts of philosophy that might be unnecessary, let's say to the average person, myself included, and that would just be for, I don't know, someone who's like developing theories in physics. That's what I thought the implication was. Like advanced, like going deep into concept formation, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't really agree with Peikoff here
Okay.
either. But I mean, to a degree, it's true. Like, obviously, if whatever reason you have some lower intelligence of some degree, however you measure it, you'll just have difficulty to some degree. But I don't think that's unique to people. I mean, we have different strengths as far as intelligence goes. So I don't think there's really one, unless we're talking about like somebody has Down syndrome, that's a clear intellectual issue that might impact their understanding of philosophy. But just say any person of average, of normal brain functioning, I don't think it should really ever be an issue within philosophy anyway.
Mm. Okay.
I mean, there's of course really advanced topics in philosophy that get really complicated on practically on the level of advanced physics, but say anything we're talking about concept formation and really anything outlined in objectivism is, I think, on the level where anybody can understand. There's not very many topics that are so so detailed and specific that you really need like an advanced degree to work through it.
But if you're talking about detailed and specific, all you mean is just an accumulation of concretes and facts, and more, not necessarily very, very high level abstractions, some abstractions, but just you have to hold in mind a lot of them. Maybe, is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, like some things within, I'm trying to think of a good example. Say a certain question about the nature of the mind and how it is that usually like philosophy about perception can get really complicated really fast. Like to what sense you might need to, like the way that senses are put together. I can't really think of a good example. It's like really on the border of science.
Yeah.
Or
Okay.
even like philosophy of math. It's like you practically need to be a mathematician to understand it.
Right.
Like, yeah, like for me, it's like not really an intelligence thing. It's just like I'm not familiar with it, so it gets really hard if I try to read it. Like, can you have the list of all lists or something? Like, I know that won't make sense, but it's like it gets complicated in a way that it's hard to hold in your head anymore, unless you have like an
That
advanced
sounds,
degree in methods.
but that, okay. So actually in this lecture, he says philosophy is the easiest and the hardest subject, because on the one hand, it's the easiest because anyone can do it. You don't need specialized knowledge. It's just based off observation. But on the other hand, the abstractions are so wide. They include, like toothaches, trucks, ice creams, and all of existence. And you have to keep that grounded. So it's one thing to like say, I understand this abstraction, which I've obviously run into a lot. Like, oh yeah, this makes sense. But you don't actually understand it because you're not it's not linked to the specific concretes and realities. So what do you think of that as far as like comparing it then to those specialized subjects? Yeah,
I'm
most
just
abstract, but not, if you're not connected, then it's one thing. But if to connect to reality and to concretes is very difficult. That's what he said in this.
I'm only doubtful of what he says because um, I don't think it's an issue of intelligence per se.
Yeah.
Like
Well, I
it could
don't
have
even
be
know
a
what
factor,
intelligence is,
but
to be honest. It's
yeah,
just
it's too
vague
vague. Is
thing.
kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the problem with the word intelligence. Is exactly a question like this. To what extent are you actually limited? I mean, it might make sense within physics, but it's hard to talk
Yeah.
about intelligence broadly speaking within philosophy. Like there's so many aspects of it that if you're not intelligent in one regard, you could easily be very intelligent in another. You can't really divide it up so easily. It's almost as varied as there are people. Like it's hard to say, oh, you're just not intelligent, you're more limited. Well, it's a very nebulous concept. It's hard to get a grasp on other than just intelligent just could be you're using concepts well, which doesn't really have to do with IQ.
Right.
IQ is a very specific concept, so but intelligence even gets very, very murky.
We can maybe explore that in detail another time. It's I guess the context was he probably wrote this in the 1980s or something. I don't know what, like back then maybe IQ had like a different sort of,
You're just
people
using
thought
it
it
in
was like,
the colloquial sense, just a very day-to-day sense rather than the technical sense.
all right. And then there are all kinds of degrees of what you can do to grasp philosophy, from a general understanding, which is of general value only, that's all, up to a very concretized reality oriented understanding, which gives you that truck-like perception across the board and arms you in a tremendous amount of situations. Okay, so it's an issue of degrees, not the case whether you just everything is floating or you've hit the jackpot, Phyllis. How does he come up with this stuff? Hit the jackpot philosophically. In fact, most people are somewhere in between. What would be is a general understanding a kind of vague, summarized, not concretized understanding? Is that what he means by that? Like, oh, I roughly know what this guy's talking about, but I don't really know how it works. Is that what you reckon he's getting at? Because I have some of that for this, for example, for
Yeah, I
some of
think
the
that's
things
what he
we've studied.
means.
Yeah, okay. Because I could say, oh, virtues are there to help you get the values you want, and because it's hard to, out of all the possibilities, to imagine, to know exactly what action to take. There's too much chaos. I would say that's a kind of vague general understanding.
Yeah, it seems like he's saying something along those lines.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that is done then. Maybe we can. This is the reason chapter. Yeah. I'll need to organize some of these into a better worded question at some point, because it's a complicated section. Let's see what I wanted to ask here. Yeah, there's so many statements you can make where it's like, how does this even work? Like, I will do, like I said before, I will have cold showers every day in winter. And that, like, the proof is you have them, right? In that case, there's some distinction, I think, that needs to be made here. And like, in terms of different things you can do and whether or not any of this is relevant.
What's the proof that you will do what you say you will do?
Yeah, does that even apply at that point? Like, there's something, I feel like there's some distinctions. Yeah.
It's not a proof issue, it seems.
But at the same time,
how do you know you will?
Well, I guess it's different if you're asking it. Actually, when I think about how do you know you will, it's a weird question, right? Because you're the one who makes the decision. So
I guess it's up to you to recognize if your statement is actually honest with yourself, if you really think you can control whatever is the thing. Like you say, I'm never going to do drugs again when they're an addict. Well, it's not going to work. It's like there is no evidence that you will, because there's no evidence that it's possible to will that away. But if you say, am I going to eat lunch at 3 p.m. today? Well, there's good evidence that you can do it. Like, I wouldn't really ask it in terms of how do I know it will happen? Like, well, no, you shouldn't phrase it that way. You should phrase it like, what's the evidence that I'm able to do it as I intend? I think that's the better way to.
So then the proof is applicable because okay, let's go to the cold shower example. Like that is in your willpower, but then I can easily, I've many times started engaging in a task and committed, all right, I'm going to do this for the rest of the month. And then I just quit somewhere in the middle and I'm like, I can't be bothered doing this anymore. And so I was thinking in terms of like when I speak to myself, I guess, you can sometimes these concepts, like the post I made about at what point is someone evil, like the application to someone else is even more difficult, but it's hard enough to apply it to yourself. Like thinking about yourself, if you know what I mean, like let's say with self-talk or whatever. So yeah, I don't know. There's something here that I'm missing, I feel like, because it doesn't, like on the one hand, I don't think proof applies, like you've pointed out, if it's a matter of you can choose to or not. But on the other hand, there is things that I would count as evidence, like, okay, well, have I cold showered before? Have I done other things before where I've committed to like 30 days and done them? I would say that's evidence, but then it contradicts the fact of me saying, well, in this case, you don't need proof because you're doing it, you're the one making the decision. There's some concept here, whether it's under the way I'm looking at this, the context that is not, I don't have, or I'm not getting.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Like, you're talking about future events, and I think proof in the context of future events is maybe not the quite right word for that. Yeah, it might not be the best word. I mean, we're dealing with evidence and what reason do you have to believe what you believe. But does the word proof apply? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's weird. Evidence does apply.
Yeah, because we're talking about we're talking about like, have I done it before? Has it ever been done by anyone? Is there something I know that's going on in my life that will prevent me from doing it?
Yeah,
things like that.
There's probably a succinct way to frame this, but I don't. There's something I'm missing. Is all I'm saying, and same for. Let's see what this is. How do I know? What is the process by which I validate? Okay, that one I worked out. That was pretty cool. Like, how do I know any of this is true? That was fine. And then I think I love that person because of her boldness. So like, and I was like, well, how does this work in that case? Like, or this is like a question of introspection. It's right. Like, what does proof apply to this? Does evidence apply to this? Like, there's a lot of things. I was like, these are day-to-day applications to the, now you're applying it to introspection in one case, and then now you're applying it to self-talk in like what you'll do or what you won't do. And I'm just curious, like, can you apply this epistemology to that thinking?
Yeah, I mean, well, one, of course, the base of what's the evidence can always apply to all these questions. You just look at like we've been talking about.
Okay, let's say I can simplify this because it's that example may be weird to get into, but like, you feel an emotion and you're introspecting, and then you say, I feel it because of this person that triggers this belief. What is the, like, what's the proof? Because maybe you're wrong, because sometimes, you come up with an explanation. It's one of a few possible explanations in terms of like a premise of an emotion. And so what, in that context of like introspection, what constitutes as proof? Actually, that's a way to reduce the question. In introspection, what constitutes proof, and does it apply? Does the concept, does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yes. You could phrase the question almost like, your claim is that this person triggers this emotion that is caused by that person.
Yes.
That's the claim you're trying to validate or prove. When you look at that, then the next question would be, well, you might ask, what are other things that could cause this to trigger in the same way? Like you could say that maybe what she was wearing triggered it, not really her. Or you might say that what you're daydreaming about is what made you feel the feeling.
What you're what?
Daydreaming about, or fantasizing about even, and you have to distinguish like what's the evidence of, you have to look at different examples, like
It's
what could cause the same thing.
But that's it. It just seems so like, okay, here's the abstract concept of proof and evidence, which when you look at on the page, evidential continuum, motive, a means, and what was the other one? Motive, means, and
Opportunity.
It's simple. But as soon as you start trying to apply it to day-to-day context, like, okay, in the case of introspection, you're like, someone triggers a feeling, they piss you off or whatever it is, they annoy you or you're attracted to them. You're like, this is an interesting person. There could be many possible explanations, and then it's not always clear. Like I could say, oh, it's because they dress in a stylish, aesthetically pleasing way, or whatever it is. I don't know. But then it turns out that you meet someone else who dressed in a stylishly, aesthetically pleasing way, and they don't make you feel that. And so that's what I mean. Like to me, it seems to become super messy when I try and apply this to just all these things. Like I will do X or introspection.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say you're wrong about that. It does start to get messy. And that's where you start to organize the concepts. And like really the only way to go through that is like to actually go through an example.
Right.
The only way to really illustrate. Like,
Okay.
yeah, it might be a little messy and it'll take work, and that's kind of the thing about it. It's not easy to go through these things. It does take some time. It might not be as overwhelming as it seems, but like you just get started on it, then you could write out like, oh, where are your uncertainties and where is it that you can't come up with any evidence.
All right. Well, I will come up with a really good concrete example, and I might post it when I do this, when I write this up.
Yeah, I think the only way to really get a handle on this is go through an example. Otherwise, we're just guessing. Yeah,
you're right. Yeah, I'll do it later. I'll come up with different examples.
And even that's the kind of what psychotherapy is in a way. That that's why psychotherapy is a thing, and it takes months sometimes to go through issues. So yeah, it will be that difficult sometimes.
But there's a difference between, like, I agree, but I think there's psychotherapy and then there's applying this concept of proof and evidence to a sort of simpler scenario, right? Like in this case, I'm not concerned in actually understanding. I'm not concerned with actually understanding a source of an emotion. I am concerned with, because I've introspected before and I know it's difficult. And so my concern is more, all right, well, that's interesting. How do I apply this concept of proof and evidence, which I've never thought in anything that I've done, I've never thought in those terms. How do I apply it to day-to-day things? That's more my interest. So, if introspection, first of all, I probably don't want to go into an actual personal introspection.
Right.
So I'd find a simpler example, but maybe like, can I shower for 30 days and then get more complicated from there with like actual concrete examples. But yeah, I mean, I do think there's a difference between the actual act of introspecting in psychotherapy and then applying this concept. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes. I do know some psychology things that could help concretize it better.
Proof and evidence? or introspection?
Yeah,
Because introspection I'm pretty
introspect.
clear on, I feel like.
Maybe not. I'll have to think about it more, but
Yeah,
yeah, if
that's
you think
fine.
of an example, it'll work better.
All right, I will come up with some more solid examples.
Random.
Random, the concept of random. If everything is a cause, then does that random just mean unknown cause, right? From our perspective.
Yeah, that's what
Hmm.
it would be. Like true randomness would mean not caused by anything in particular. I don't think there's such thing as a true random.
Right. So when we speak of random, we just speak of things from our, should I say, perspective or current level of knowledge. And so
Yeah,
we
like
don't
rolling
have
a
knowledge.
dice.
Right.
Like rolling a dice is randomly at 6. Like, you know, it's not technically truly random. There's something about the way the gravity works and the angle it hits the table and the velocity
The motion of
and
your
all that.
hand and yeah.
Yeah, and that does cause it to get there, but there's no reasonable way to determine that. So in effect, it's unknown and random.
So maybe I could even add a bit more depth to it and say, random is, I was thinking about this in terms of work. That's why it came up. So like random is when there are unaccounted for factors that are significant in determining the effect or the event or whatever. Does that add any information?
It just unaccount. It just means you can't account for everything, or maybe not like
Or
that. You
a
can't
decent
take it.
amount?
Yeah.
Because you were telling me before, point two is a large, something in psychology, point two is a large explanatory.
Well, that's in a different context actually. So, but let's just say that I don't know, like rolling dice. There's really very little way to predict how it's gonna end on a 6. So you really just evenly say it's just even, like 20% chance to land on a number or whatever it is. Then you would.
You said the example from before doesn't apply with psychology. Point two is a large explanatory amount.
Yeah,
But if you
that's it.
rolled a dice and you knew point two of what would cause it to roll, like you'd be way better at predict. You wouldn't say it's random anymore.
Yeah, just to take some arbitrary number. Yeah, like say if you know 20% of the factors, you wouldn't say it. You can just say it's random. Or random would just mean it's not correlated with anything.
Mm.
That's what statisticians usually think of it as. If it's random, there's no correlation with anything, or they're independent.
More like no correlation with anything that's been accounted for and that you can measure.
Right.
Yeah?
Okay. Yeah, that sounds right.
Cool. This is more not a question, but like I think maybe we've discussed this before of like any other thinkers that could add something to thinking about this better, like thinking about risk. Is it causal or statistical? Meaning like if you know, when you think about like, we were talking before about we use statistics, we can't account for all the causal variables. And so is there some distinction between thinking of like, is risk, does that mean you're thinking about it statistically or causally?
I'd say usually statistically. But if it's a risk, it means you're unsure to some degree.
Right. Because you're not accounting for all the causal factors.
And knowing that something's missing.
And then, yeah, if you had, you already answered, you said that you can't think of anyone who's explored stats in this kind of like epistemological detail. But then like, I thought like maybe Karl Popper or something, but that's probably getting too ahead of where I'm at.
There probably are, like Bayesian statistics is a big topic. So I'm sure there's a book about that, but I'm not really sure to what extent it's all been integrated into like with causal stuff and what we're talking about with evidence. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But within stats, it's definitely been written about a lot.
I suppose I'm jumping way ahead given how much I don't get yet. So if I did go through, let's say I went through all this stuff and I really had a very deep and specific understanding, and then I read something else, it would make sense because it'd be able to integrate it, bridge, come to terms with the author and so on. And then, let's see, some of this will be repeat.
Yeah, some of this stuff you're asking here is like, is within statistics. Like Bayesian stats would answer that like pretty much exactly.
What?
Like thinking about in terms of knowing what did happen versus what could happen.
Oh, really?
Like Bayesian stats usually begins with like the probability that something did happen, or given the probability that something did happen, or knowing that something did happen, what are the chances the next thing happened? And usually trying to construct things that way.
Yeah, I think I've seen some, but I always get turned off when it's like, if A/B, therefore something else, and it's just like it's completely disconnected from anything. And so or it's like, if men die at 65, and they're just like terrible examples.
They're weird examples.
They're rationalist examples.
I was literally reading about it last night, so that's why it was in my head.
All right. Yeah, maybe I could. I don't think I'll jump to it now, but maybe later when I've got a better understanding of this topic, I could. But
yeah, I mean that's what you would be getting into eventually if you're really into these possibilities, like statistics and the philosophy around it. When to use statistics, philosophically speaking, there's a lot out there, and definitely a lot. With you're talking about like people in trading, as you probably recognize, like they probably studied it too.
Well, depends on the trader, but yeah, some do for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, this is where I was trying to get my head around Peikoff saying like a capacity in the species doesn't imply use of that capacity in this instance. So like I thought, okay, plane is a species of is a kind of technology, and we know technology can crash or malfunction, but then there's no evidence that the plane in this case will malfunction. Therefore, it's inadmissible. So we throw it out as arbitrary, and therefore my plane can't crash and there is no risk. And I was like,
insane.
This is me just trying to apply what I've learned. And then I think now where I was wrong is that what you explained to me is that, well, it is a bit tricky though, because like, what is does statistics qualify as evidence? That's what I'm sort of confused by. Like, obviously we don't have evidence. It can.
I would argue that yes, it can be evidence for future decisions. It's hard to explain. I've got a few examples in mind that I'll have to write out probably, but I think it can constitute evidence depending on what kind of claim you're making. Not always universally, but sometimes it'll be evidence.
Because even in a plane, like pretty much all the factors should be accounted for, right? Apart from like a meteor from space hitting the.
Yeah.
So then if all the factors are accounted for, then this approach would apply of like, it's inadmissible, therefore you throw it out and there's no risk.
You'd have to actually like, given that it's cold, what are the chances that a plane would malfunction? I mean, that would be sensible, I think, to talk about. You would have to use it in terms like that. Like, given that something happened, that'd be like the given part is like the evidence. Like, oh, now that I see this thing happened, does that change things? Like, say, say a wing stopped working, your propeller stopped working. What are the chances at that point you'll crash? I mean, that would be like using evidence. It's like saying, I've observed the propeller stop working. Now what might happen? It's like, I've observed the context changed. Now, how does that change the probabilities?
But in all those cases, would you say the key is whether or not in the risks calculated, like if we're talking about statistics, if there's an unaccounted for variable, like if you have unaccounted for variables and or like let's say a certain model of plane crash and you're like, we don't know why, then that's when it becomes a risk um, because you in the statistics you've got things you don't know what the cause is, you just know
Yeah,
that.
like
Okay.
you might not be able to predict what causes the propeller to stop working,
Okay.
but you know what the probabilities are. If the propeller stops working, you pretty
Yeah.
much know what that will be.
All
I
right.
mean, because it was an oil change or sabotage or it was hacked or God was angry at you or whatever a person might want to think of. It's just, um, it doesn't matter. It just matters like those you could say are random. It's random that it broke, or you could say that. But then once it did break, well, you just go on as if it's a known fact. It just happened. So you don't. It's not longer a probability that it happened. So then you just work from there.